Good evening and welcome to Laughing Monkey Music Show. Today we have Fish on. Fish is a huge solo career, and he's also known for his great work in Marillion. This has been his newest album, and your last album, right? Unless things have changed, is just,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. It's and the Garden of Remembrance has been a song that's been in my mind for a long time now. It's very powerful.
Thank you.
The video and the tears. I know you do a little acting too, so or you have, but that wasn't acting.
There was no acting involved in that clip. That was all it was a genuine
Right.
emotion on that Remembrance clip. It was really difficult. My mum's got dementia, and she's been living with us now for 3 years, and it was weird because when I actually sung the song in the studio, and then having to do the video there and things, and be very aware of her presence in the house. It was it was difficult. When the tear was shed in that video, it was genuine.
Yeah, I could see that. I saw the making of it, and I saw that it was at first. I thought, wow, is it acting? But when I watched it, because I have other relatives that were also in the home,
Yeah.
I started getting choked up a little bit. I could feel it in the back of your throat.
Yeah.
I was watching it, and then afterwards, when I saw that how you were actually going through the emotions, it totally made sense.
Yeah,
because I felt that power.
It was a very, very, very difficult song to sing as well. I think, but as I said, because I'm literally, the control room where we were recording is literally 5 meters away where my mum's bed is. Through walls, obviously.
Right.
Not in the room.
She can't sleep.
Not when the drums were getting played. No, she couldn't sleep at all for that. Yeah. No, it was the only awkward time. I mean, the control room. This is where I am at the moment. It's got heavy insulation on it. I mean, it's got heavy sound insulation, big doors and things, But when a lot of the instruments were recorded in here. Every now and again, we'd put cabs out on what is really my living room, right? I mean, because I live in the studio. And I moved in here in 2001 when it'd been a commercial studio up to 1998. So when I moved in here, it was a complete studio, and I've just been knocking through walls and just turned it in a residential property over all these years since I moved in. And it's strange that like when we do albums, I've done every solo album here since the Vigil in the Wilderness of Mirrors album.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And over the years, it's a case of moving the furniture. It's like you bring the drum, you move the dining room table, and you put the drum kit in. But the drums were the only thing that they're obviously really loud. So my mum actually, we got it all arranged. So my mum went into respite care down at my sister's for a couple of weeks when we got the drums done. But it's great. It's a weird place to live because it's like you're very aware that when you're walking around, there's scores of meters of copper wire underneath the studio that's probably worth a fortune now.
It gives you a little extra energy, right? Those magnetic gloves they sell. you got your whole house as a magnetic glove. It's really beautiful. I've seen now it looks like you have a lot of skylights, and I love your Fish Fridays. It feels like you have a lot of light in that house or / studio.
Yeah,
it's got to be very inspiring. I'm totally envious of that. I'm not envious of a lot of things in life, but skylights, that's something to be jealous about.
It's really strange. It's like I've been with a year off. I've got no touring at all this year because a mixture of COVID and Brexit regulations. And to put on top of that, there's so many bands been hopscotching their tours that there's so many tours going out in 2022, and the pizza is only so big, and even the 7 shows that we played last year. Right, those shows would have been sold out in normal circumstances. They would have been sold out, and we were like 20% off house, and there's bands out there that are 40%. The people are nervous about going to gigs. They don't know what the protocols are. They don't want to stand in big crowds, and they don't know if the band's going to appear. They don't know if the band's going to catch something and whether they're going to be stuck.
I understand. I've bought tickets I haven't used because I'm afraid because people are not being respectful of other people.
Yeah.
So I've actually just wasted money.
It's a crazy time. I mean, through that insecurity and wariness of people going out to large events, through their wariness of buying tickets for events that might not even happen. And like I said, having that money sitting about, and with everything, it's very difficult for us to contemplate touring. I've got a very good friend of mine. He blew his entire 2022 and about a couple of weeks ago, and I phoned him up and I said, "Look, don't feel bad about this, you know." And I said,
Yeah.
I had to make the same decision last year, and it was like, we can't do this, it's impossible because there is no insurance. We have no insurance for a show that goes down, which means I'm liable for all costs.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, I mean, he was going to have to pay. He had 10 guys going through 8 countries in Europe, and crossing every border, you've got to test, right? So I mean, it's like going across a state in the USA, and you've got to pay for testing. It was going to cost them £24,000 sterling just in tests for 10
What?
guys,
That's
and on top
insane.
of that, because of Brexit, we've got, although we don't have to buy working visas, you still have to get visas, and you have to pay basically charges for them to deal with the visas. It's and that can reach you. I think he costed it out as being another £25,000. So you're looking at a band that's having to come up. We're looking at paying £50,000 out of a tour, and they're playing 1,000 to 1,000 a night, 1,500, 2,000 some nights, and taking those sort of costs becomes impossible. So
Mm-hmm.
I just went,
I don't blame you.
2022, I'm going to take a step back, go into the garden and let the year go by and look at it 2023 for my farewell tour.
That's excellent. Yeah, Brexit really got weird. Brexit would have been weird on its own. And I'm an American. I'm not judging any countries by any means because I'm an American. We have our own hot mess, hot garbage, dumpster fire. But what I'm saying is, on an outside, is watching the musical struggle of musicians.
Yeah.
That is what a crazy, unfortunate change that. And also, I think Brexit, and I think all countries, the world should have some better policies for traveling musicians because the taxes that America does for musicians is just ridiculous, and they're getting you everything. They're already bringing into America economy and money flow, sort of like double and triple tax them, and then they sell merch, and it's a nightmare. And then now you've got your own version of it. You escape the American version. You can at least make some profit doing Europe.
But this isn't a 5-hour transatlantic flight to land in
Right.
JFK. This is an hour and 20-minute
I know, that's what I'm saying. You lost that.
And the thing is, it's like, at least with the States, if I was going to come to the States, I go down to the American Embassy in London and I get a working visa,
Right.
and that allows me to travel in the 50-odd states across in the USA that we're going to be playing or whatever, or the 8 states we'll be doing or something, whatever, right?
Right.
But across here, we've got to apply individually to
That's
27 different countries.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
I mean, it was easier for you guys just to make some decent money just to go out and tour around you without having to worry about the shenanigans. Now, this is a kick in the shin. This is worse on some level.
But I mean, if you want to look at the historical situation with Marillion, right? 1983, we put the Fugazi album out, and we were just starting to play our first shows in Germany for festivals and things, open air events, right? But 1984, right, we'd become, a minor force, and especially in Germany and Holland. And that helped us sell the albums. That helped go against the debt that we had to EMI Records for all the advances, for all the albums we'd made and the tour advances. And without the income from those countries and being able to grow into those countries, Marillion would never have survived and never made it to Misplaced Children and Roke Cayley, And you've got to think about all the young bands that are out there now that don't have the ability to tour Europe, especially in small incarnations of that band, the early incarnations of a band. They're going to get snuffed out because you can't keep on touring, the UK, this island group that I live on. There aren't enough gigs to sustain it on a regular basis to sustain it, and there isn't there aren't the venues these days. There isn't we need Europe for bands to grow. And and nobody thought about this. Nobody thought about the detail when everybody was running towards this Brexit. And I have to say, I live in Scotland, right? And up here, we voted 62% to remain in Europe, right? And it was the United Kingdom vote that carried the Isles in, right? And it kind of irritates me because I believe in Scotland, Scottish independence, right? I believe that we can sustain ourselves and exist as an independent country. And you know, one of the things is that, you know, only a few years previously to the Brexit vote, you know, there was a referendum here in which it was yes, no, yes to go independence, no against, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the big argument then that was presented to us was, you know, if you leave the UK, you're going to be out the EU, and it made up a lot of people's minds that they didn't want to be separated from every major kind of, like, you know, landmass, economically speaking. So a lot of people voted no. And then yet 2-3 years later, we're in a situation in the country that I live in, right, in Scotland, where, you know, we voted to remain in the EU and got taken out of it against the wishes of the majority. And it's very tough to deal with. And as a musician, you know, it's incredibly hard. My wife is German. I have to apply, and she's applying for pre-settled status, which she has, and she has to apply for settled status in the UK, you know. And
Really?
yeah, and it's there's a lot of things going on. I mean, you know, I mean, I survived COVID, right? I survived the lockdown despite having 0 gigs. I mean, it's the least gigs I've done in 40 years, right? And I mean, I was wiped. I mean, we did 1 show in Aberdeen, and it was called, right? And luckily, I had the Weltschmerz album that came out in October 20. And the mail order in that sustained me. It kept me going, and we did various things. We put out recordings of the very first show, supported the band and the crew as much as we could. And then, but when it moved in, when Brexit happened, not only did it change all my touring, right, but also my mail order completely changed, because I became in a situation with Europe where I'd say probably 40% of my sales, 50% of my sales are in Europe, right? And then suddenly they were having to pay taxes on their side. And to put it in a nutshell, they were paying £1.50, about another $3 or whatever it was, more for an album, you know, because of, again, costs on doing the paperwork on the VAT that they were having to pay. So as for the music industry as a whole, for independents like myself that are operating out with a major reliant on mail orders, we took a kick on that. And, you know, with Spotify and streaming, our publishing incomes have all gone down, right? So the only place you can make money now, and I don't want this to come across as a moaning mini kind of, like, you know, but the only place we can really make money now is live. Yeah. And the live arena has been up with COVID. So I mean, for the creative industries, I mean, from film to theatre to the music industry, from band members to crew members to truck drivers to, you know, merchandisers. I mean, it's been such a kick, you know, to say this. And I'm very aware that American bands are suffering exactly the same with what you've got to deal. Yeah. You know, as far as vaccinations and everything else goes, I mean, I am boosted, I am vaccinated, and I was very glad to be boosted. You know, it made me feel a lot more secure when I went on a tour where, you know, yeah, we were going out, and it was one of the least enjoyable tours I ever did. I mean, we were on a nightliner. We got off the nightliner in the afternoon. We went into the backstage area. There was no guests allowed. You didn't see any friends. You couldn't go to pubs. You couldn't go to restaurants. You couldn't go out. You sat in a backstage area. You did the gig, and you had great fun on stage for 2 hours. And then you got a shower and went back in the nightliner again. Repeat, you know. And so I mean, it's changed. I mean, the whole live music industry is completely changed, and I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, talking to German business acquaintances I have, and music business acquaintances, I mean, agents, you know, they're saying they don't expect Europe to get back to normal until the summer. And I mean, you know, even now we've got massive tours going out, and the regulations on crowd sizes, they change from country to country. Regulations and testing change. Nobody's very sure. Travel. There's so much. You know, for example, Weltschmerz, we spent a long time and get the sonic values, the production and everything right. And, you know, people listen to it on an MP3 player where it's compressed to hell. It's like, well, what's the point? You know? I mean, you know, when I was a kid, you know, when I bought my first hi-fi, I mean, you know, I was always looking to better the hardware that I was listening to the music on, so I could hear the music better. And you know, it seems to be in reverse now. It has come from an old school. I mean, you know, I bought albums. I mean, yeah, I listened to singles and I listened to radio and all the rest of it, but you know, I wanted to buy the albums of the artist. You know, I wasn't, you know, interested in hearing Roundabout. I wanted to hear Fragile by Yes, you know, and I was always brought up on albums, and I think, you know, an album it encapsulates a period in time a lot better than than just one track does. And I think, that's the problem. We've kind of evolved into this thing where we listen to track by track rather than listen to the artist over a period of 20 minutes on a side of a vinyl or 60 minutes on a CD. I'd like to hear the expression of the artist within an album rather than just songs. And like I said, I mean, I've always been brought up on albums. I mean, when Marillion and I put together Misplaced Childhood, we didn't settle on Kaylee as a single, when we were writing it. It was like, we were writing the side of an album, and we just happened to have an absolute diamond in the middle of one side of an album that could be basically extricated and shown on its own,
Right.
and guided a lot of people to that album, But I write albums. I mean, when I approached Weltschmerz, we were going to write a slab of music, that grew as the writing schedule elongated, and it was like, okay, let's put a double CD on this, But I wasn't going to write tracks. I was going to write an album.
Because these are full albums, and these are back in the 70s and in the 80s, where the bands were nurtured. At least that was one thing record labels did early on. Some of them actually nurtured you a couple albums. Nowadays, if you had a bad album now, out the track, you're gone. You could build on it. You could have solid albums. The songs were put together. You worked an album. And that's why I have a huge stack of these, Yes albums and Untold albums and some Marillion albums and some of your other solo stuff. But there came a point where like there weren't a lot of full complete albums coming back now. Like more modern albums aren't even worth buying a full vinyl because it's like they weren't making vinyl as well. They weren't. There's a resurgence, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everything kind of toppled in the vinyl world because no one was making good albums anymore.
Yeah, I think there are still people making great albums. I don't listen to them. It's one thing I don't do. I mean, I don't really listen to new music. I don't sit there here with the radio. The only time I put the radio on is when I'm in my car, right? And if I'm in the house, if the wife and I decide to listen to music, we'll be inspired to listen to music because of something, and we will put on albums,
Yeah.
And it's if we're having a drinks party, then there's times when I'll zap through I'll turn into DJ with the wine.
But that's what I'm saying. I mean,
and then the next day you've got that mountain of plastic lying there trying to work out which CD goes in which album cover. Yeah.
The next morning, trying to clean them up.
But I listen to albums, and but I prefer Netflix these days, But I mean, I've just become. I've become isolated because I don't need to listen to other music. I don't need to. Well, up until like I said, Weltschmerz is my final album, but I never felt during Weltschmerz that I needed to listen to modern music to find out where my production was going to go. I knew where my production was going to go.
You don't need to. I mean, you were so modern. It's interesting. That's the thing, and it's one thing that's kind of sad. Speaking to you about that being your last album, because there's only a few artists like you that are still creating stuff that are like all your albums have. Mark, the artist, and the artwork, and like with vinyl and an album, the great part of an album is you can open it. There's all kinds of packaging. There's art. There's a whole process. It's not just a couple songs, and out of 5 or 10, a couple are going to be singles to make the cash. An album used to be a series of songs that kind of work together with some kind of continuity, whether it's a theme or just fun. The artwork worked together. There was lyrics, there's pictures of the band on the bus, or there was a theme or a mascot. You put it down. It was an event. Your friends came over. You did something.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, it's a bit like reading a novel. It's like I want to read a novel. I don't want to read a Reader's Digest version of it.
Exactly.
And I don't want to basically be told, "Oh, read these pages because they're great." Right? These have got powerful images or whatever on them, or it's a great piece of prose here or whatever. Right? I want to read the whole goddamn novel. And that's the way I approach albums. Weltschmerz works as a double CD, it could be even a triple vinyl if it were one more track, I think it was. But I mean, it works because all the songs revolve around a certain theme in a way. They've got a feel that basically overlaps within the album. There's a sense of timing within the Weltschmerz album. They all, and you don't get that listening to artists track by track. But it's horses for courses. I mean,
well, I know, but the point was like when I heard this, this is gonna be your last album. I'm like, I'm happy for you because you don't work for anybody. You're yourself. You're an artist. But as a listener and a longtime fan, it's sad because it's like,
No, it's not. It's not, because I don't want to end up being one of these prog artists
no,
that's
no,
got
I
a
don't want. I'm not saying. I'm saying I just
it's
love.
got a fan. It's got a fan base. I've got. Oh, wait a minute. It's like it's December. We better get the plastic ready to sell. You know, and
No,
I've got a certain amount of integrity. You know that. I didn't want to become a kind of a parody of myself, and it's just I got to the point where a lot of the great melodies have gone, you know, and you know, a lot of the great hook lines have gone, and you know, every time you're writing now, you feel like you're trespassing on somebody else, you
mhm.
know, and I got tired of avoiding the minefields, and I didn't want to start echoing myself, or I didn't want to be copying myself or going back and pillaging old ideas and redoing them. I didn't want to do that,
No,
you know, and I didn't, and it was like when I left Marillion, you know, I knew that Clutching was the last album I was going to do with that band. It was like, you know, unless there was something major, unless we had a major break from each other,
that's
you know,
such a good
after
album.
Clutch.
Such
Yeah,
a good
it's a
album.
brilliant. It's my favorite album, and this is one of my problems, that I left Marillion after what I considered was the finest album I made with them, and everybody goes, "Well, what would have happened next?" And that is exactly how I wanted to leave my solo career, with a great album, rather than something that was, you know, a piffle and a couple of wee bits in it. I wanted to put a solid piece of work together and go, "That's it," right? And then people can go, "Well, what would he have done next?" And I
Right.
wanted to leave on high benchmarks, you know,
I get
and
that. Well, I think what I'm saying is like I'm happy, sad because here's why. I'm not saying it's bad that you're doing it. Like when you watch a good, like you binge, you watch, say you watch like a Netflix or some show, right? You're watching a great series,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it ends, and you're like, oh, it needed to end because it was so good, and I wish there was more, but it's over, and I understand why because you wouldn't want to retread it. That's what I'm
You've
saying
got
with
it.
you. You're ending on a high note, and I'm still wanting it, but you're ending on a high note, and I get that, and I respect it. You know what I'm saying? It's not like you're beating it down. That's why it's happy, sad. It's
But
not.
I'll take it. I'll go somewhere else, and it's like, you know, I mean, you know, as far as performance goes, yeah, I want to do one farewell tour in 2023. I would love it to come to the United States of America, you know, just because I want it
I'd
to be
love you to be
fun.
here.
Well, I just want to be fun. It's like, you know, I mean, this was it. I mean, the last tour I went out in 2018, the big one. You know, I had terrible problems with my back and my knees and things. And, you know, when the kids were going on a day off, going, "Let's go up the old town and like go to a bar." And I'm going, "Wait a minute, there's half a mile of cobbles. I'm going to go to a bar. I know where the old town is. I've been there like 5 times before. And then I'm going to have a couple of beers and then I'm going to walk all the way back again. And it's going to be extra ibuprofen in the morning." Right.
Right.
And I went, "You know what? I'm going to stay in I'm going to stay in the hotel room, find a restaurant nearby. It's Netflix and white wine." And that's what I did for over 2 months. And you know, and it was like at the end of the day, I went, you know, "Whoa, you know, I love being on stage, but all the faff and paff that goes around it, I was sick of." And there's a lot of artists feel that way nowadays, you know. And I'm destined to be on a nightliner for the rest of my life. You know, I'm not going to be playing stadiums. And there's a reality check, and it's got, wait a minute, don't want to be away from home for that long. And yeah, we made money, but you know, and it's like I've got a life to live. And that was where I went, you know, 2023, completely different attack approach. You know, I want to go out with, rather than trying to put everything in my career into one set, go to a venue that I really want to play, that I've always loved playing in the past, do 2 nights, right? We drive there, stay in hotels so I can meet friends, do 2 gigs that are a lot of fun, play a
Hmm.
lot of songs to people, and then go, bam, that's it, bye. And just choose the places I want to play. And I'd like to come across and bring that to the States as well. You know, I mean, just to have fun. And that's one of the problems that I think on the 2008 tour, apart from the shows, the fun was going out of it, all the associated stuff that went on with it.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about going wild and crazy. I'm just talking about, you know, I was very much focused on, I have got to get through this day and hit a show. And you know, when I'm standing at the bottom of a bunch of steps leading up to the stage, you know, like at the Amsterdam Paradiso, it's like Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. I mean, it's a story and a half, right?
Right.
And you know, you're looking at these steps and you're going like, Jesus, well, if it comes to an encore, I'm not coming down these stairs. I'll stay up at the top, even if they, you know. And it was when it was gets like that, and it's like, whoa, and you're focused on it. It becomes,
I
it's
think touring is harder. I couldn't, like I said, I couldn't
very
imagine.
hard.
We were talking, I was shoveling, and like, I'm only in my 50s, and I'm like, you're beat. I couldn't imagine being on the road every night performing at my best.
Yeah,
It's a challenge, and I respect that. And that's what I'm saying. I'm glad for you to be able to retire and step away from it.
yeah,
And you're
yeah.
leaving at a
I
high
mean, you
point.
know,
You're leaving everybody wanting more. It's the perfect thing.
yeah, I mean, you know, but you know, I'm going to do other things. People go, "Oh, well, that's you retiring." It's like as if I'm not going to do anything. I want to write books. You know,
Or do you?
I am a writer who can sing. I'm not a singer who can write. You know, I'm not the singer in the band who goes, oh, I'll do the lyrics then. It was like I approached the music. When I went into music, I was a lyricist, right? And I could happen to be able to sing.
I
That
like
was
that
what
word,
happened.
lyricist over poetry, because I think poetry is
I'm not a
narrow.
poet. I'm a
I know that.
lyricist.
I don't think you are. I was going to ask you if you thought you were, because people call you a poet. And I don't think of you as a poet. You are.
I'm a prose writer
You're
more than
yeah,
anything
yeah. You're
else.
like a lyricist of what's around you, as opposed
Yeah.
to writing like haikus and Hallmark cardy stuff. That's what I think poetry is, and you know, you're not that.
There's a lot of editing. I'm definitely not accurate, but I mean, one of the things that got me out of everything and kind of one of the things that really got me out of everything was writing stuff on Facebook and Twitter in the early days where the characters were limited and you had to really watch what you're writing, and that really kind of taught me a lot. But I mean, I do self-edit. Sometimes, that can become a little bit restrictive. And I just want to open myself up and I want to write books. And, there's an autobiography that's definitely in there, which is not going to be kind of your standard autobiography because, I mean, I bounce around things. I mean, I won't be writing a book about, my life with Marillion. I mean, that is the last thing I want to do. I mean, Marillion was a very important thing in my life, but it wasn't my life. I was only in Marillion for, what was it, 7 years or whatever it was. And I've been on the planet for 64 this year, and a lot has happened around me.
Well, and I gotta say that we talked about that before. To me, when I speak with you, like some point it's always like Marillion, and that's what I'm saying. That's the similarity with Ian Anderson. It's always like Jethro Tull at a certain time period. Like you're an artist. You've done like 3 times the amount of work solo than those couple great albums. I mean, you lived an entire life.
Yeah.
And it's very unfair for somebody to pigeonhole you as that little piece.
Yeah.
I'm always frustrated seeing artists like, if I'm a fan of Fish, in those 4 great albums, Jester and Fugazi and Clutching Straws, and then and then we start going through other stuff, and you're doing your own original stuff. Then you're doing covers of fans you like, and then you're doing more original stuff, and you're doing live performances, DVDs, and your books have like you have artwork and books with them, and hundreds of pages, and it's a whole thing where it's not just you're more than just that one band.
It's always been my approach. And I always look at the whole Marillion thing. People look on it as being as if it's 2 different people. It's the same guy. I just had 4 different. I was working with 4 different musicians,
right?
And I think Vigil in the Wilderness of Mirrors stands up really well against anything that I did previous to that. But I mean, the problem is when I went independent, I signed a Polydor. I went through, 2 albums of Polydor. One was the cover version album, Songs for the Mirror, and then I started to write myself within the independent framework. And the problem was that I didn't have a major record company behind me. I didn't have global distribution. I didn't have global promotion and PR behind me. And I wrote some great songs in there. And don't get me wrong. I mean, Welshworth came out and we did very well with Welshworth. Mm-hmm. I don't sell on Amazon, right? I don't sell anywhere apart from through fishmusic.scot. And that's it. I don't do retail. I don't do anything. We just do it all here, right?
But a lot of artists
really good living off it.
I imagine you probably got better profits. And I've heard this a lot of artists say, I do my stuff solo or on my own, and I can sell, a tenth of what I used to do. But I have my hands in it. I make more money. I hear more bands nowadays that were huge platinum bands. They'll say, I make more money now just because I'm doing it myself, which is really that punk DIY attitude where
that's it.
You make more.
We do. I don't have an expensive lifestyle. I've got season tickets for my local football club, Hibernian in Edinburgh, right? That my wife and I have, right? That is a major expense in a year, which is about I think it was 600, 700 quid for this season, which I've not seen at all yet. I haven't seen a game yet. I watch it on TV. But I support my local club. I've got a Skoda and a Skoda and a Mini in the drive. That's what I drive. It's not. I don't, have a Volvo or anything. And it's like our biggest expense is the garden, right? And that's it. That's our lifestyle, and I'm really happy with it. We don't go to nightclubs. We don't go to fancy restaurants. We don't have chateaus in France or places on an island in the Caribbean. It's a really simple lifestyle, and I love it. And it's great, and I like simple. And that's why having the kind of the independent records set up we have through Chocolate Frog, where it's just basically my wife and I, we can keep ourselves alive, and it's easy. It's really easy.
And a lot of artists do that.
I don't have to. I'm not in a band, right? So I'm not having to deal with committees, and I don't have management because I self-manage. And and we make a decent living here. and I love my garden, and I love being at home, and all the rest of it.
That's
And life
interesting.
has got to be fun, you know. And as I said, you know, being away from this place, you know, from where my wife is, and I won't, you know, it's being away from that. It's not my idea of fun. I don't like it, you know. And
You
I'd
are
like
a
to,
garden guy. Like,
yeah, I love gardens.
so this is really great because, like, and I had to put it aside so I didn't forget. Your one of your first singles when you were Marillion. I don't really delve into Marillion because whatever
That's okay. Yeah,
was
cool.
Garden Party. I know. I'm saying, but I think there's more to you. I think people focus too much on something on one subject when there's so much more to you.
Garden Party was social commentary. That was social commentary from
Right, but
Cambridge.
my point is, but the garden, and you've done even before you were a musician, which is great. How you started so much later. You've done gardening and forestry, and then even one of your last singles, Garden of Remembrance, where a garden is a symbol of growth, and there's so many things. It almost feels like it's such a tie-in to a lot of the stuff you do, the growth and the
Yeah, I mean,
creativity, and it's
the gardens and flowers on Weltschmerz came to be because my father died in 2016, right? And I knew he was going and stuff, and I'd kind of mentally prepared for his leaving, and I thought that, let me say, I went to see a counsellor for the first time way back in about 2010, and I went in, and all I could say, it was like I vomited my entire life over her for 40 minutes, right? And there was a couple of moments where she was emotionally very moved, and at the end of it, she said, "What you've done is," she said, "you've dealt with everything intellectually, but you've not dealt with it emotionally, right?" And that's always me. I tend to think things through, and I'd thought my father's death through, and I thought I dealt with it, and I hadn't. And I basically, I mean, I found myself in the garden more and more, and basically the year disappeared. And that was where I was healing. I was healing out in the garden, growing stuff, nurturing stuff, and just losing myself. And it was always, it still is a very important place for me to go, you know, when, you know, I feel overwhelmed. I mean, I learned a lot of things about myself during the Weltschmerz album. I mean, during my research, and I do a lot of research on lyrics because I want to make sure that I'm getting things right, you know, and I'm getting the pool of knowledge that I need to kind of find something. And during Walking on Eggshells, because it was prompted by people that I knew, whatever, I started to read a lot of books about ADHD, autism, and all the rest of it. And I actually recognized that I was definitely on the spectrum, and I can't do numbers, right?
Mhm.
I am rubbish with numbers, right? And words, that's where I go. And, you know, I talk loudly, and when I'm arguing, which upsets people, you know, I tend to be very forceful in my arguments because it's like I've prepared everything before I go into it. And I find it difficult to process the argument that's coming back at me sometimes, depending on what my state of mind is for a kickoff. But yeah, and it's something I found out about myself, and it was kind of quite strange, and the garden was all part of that. It's somewhere where I feel safe. It's somewhere, you know, where I go out, I'm just part of life. I'm not fish, and I'm not dealing with the crap. And it's something that, you know, I mean, the garden that surrounds me, you know, most of it was designed in my head, and really the period around about 2001 to 3, when, you know, I was basically, my wife left me. I'd taken my daughter, who she took to Berlin, and I was left with £900,000 worth of debt, right? And I had to get my way out of it. And I moved into the studio, sold my house, did deals, rectified righted the ship, kept in touch with my daughter, never saw her for longer than 6 weeks. I was never away from her for longer
Yeah.
than 6 weeks. And when I went to bed at night, when my head was tumbling and twisting and writhing, I designed a garden. And that's what I did. I basically, in my head, I put the whole thing together, stone by stone, place by place, you know. and that's how
Really? That's
yeah,
fantastic. That's really interesting.
I kept my shit together. And I went out and I used to go out and and develop in the garden. It just made me feel good, and it felt like I was kind of creating something, that I was contributing something that was like, and it's always stayed with me. And I love the garden. And my wife is I mean, the reason my wife's German, and we weren't sure whether we would live in Germany, which I love. I love the country of Germany, and I love the area where my wife was living down in Karlsruhe in Baden-Württemberg, and we didn't know whether we were going to live here or in East Lothian in Scotland, which is to the south of Edinburgh, in a little pocket like the Shire, or whether we lived in Karlsruhe. And we did the Winston Churchill bit, got a bit of paper out, wrote all the pros and cons and da. And we moved here, and my wife loved it here, because what we wanted to do is, if we could have duplicated this place in Germany, we would have done it, but we couldn't do it. And my wife and I basically, we do the garden together. That's where, and that's part of Gardener Remembers.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's beautiful. Also, on a side note, it sounds way cool that you live in a shire than I live in like in a town or a district. I just want to say you get points for living in a shire.
We call it the Shire because of the Hobbit.
I know. But the fact, but it's more realistic than me being like, yeah, I live in like a street in a town, and I got a wetland across the street from me or something. It's not as fancy.
It's a county, and I know you've got them over
I
there.
know.
But we live in a wee sheltered area. It's really warm. It's a great agricultural place. But as happens with really nice places that are warm and people want to live here, it's like we've got an influx of building and just destroying the county. But that's another. What I want to do is, like, as I said, this is the control room. This is where the music was made for years, and like I'm in the process of, this is going to evolve, and I want to turn this into a writing area and kind of like mini library and stuff, and just a place where I can come and I can feel comfortable writing. We're blowing up the Veluxes, and that's a really interesting thing, because it was like where I was when I was a kid. A lot of my early years and formative years was where we lived in Dalkeith and Midlothian. When my mum and originally my grandmother and grandfather had a full house, a big house, a 2-story house, and they gave the top flat to my mum and dad. And my mum and dad moved in there, and I was born, and my sister was born 3 years later. And we didn't have the space. My granddad moved in to care with us and stuff. My maternal granddad, and as kids we got moved up into the attic, right? And there was 2 big rooms up there, and all I had out to look out of that window was a skylight, right? And it was a big, heavy cast iron skylight with really heavy glass in it. And when I was a kid, it was really difficult to lift up the single bar and push it up. And that was my light. And I was in there when I was 2-3 years old, right? And there was no fire escape. There was nothing. And I look back in it now, and it's,
oh my God, it sounds like a death trap.
Yeah. If something had happened, so my sister and I would have been goners, and all you could go down was go down this hatch and down a ladder to get down to the bottom, right? It was a stainless steel,
It sounds like a submarine. It sounds like you were living in a submarine.
But it's really interesting, because that was where I listened to music. That was where a lot of things happened in my life for the first time. A lot of thinking happened up there in that attic, right? And I was always aware of this one skylight, and it was interesting because every single house that I've ever lived in, right, since then, my first house that I bought in '84, even though it was a wee terrace house, right, it had a really big room, right? And every house has always had a really big room, and I've always been knocking out windows and stuff like that, right? And I think it's a psychological thing. It's a throwback. And the place I live in now, the studio, I'm sitting here, and I've got 2 Veluxes above my desk, right? At the moment, they're hidden by glass. But when we open up this roof, I'm putting Veluxes in. Through in the room that you watch Fishing Friday in, there's about 7 or 8 Veluxes across the 2 roof spaces, right? And there's big doors going out. And I think this is this thing. Like I feel comfortable in a big room. And if you actually put me to what I'm now, 1.9 meters, to where I was as a kid, probably relatively speaking, the room that I was in as a boy was an attic. It's probably proportionally the same size as the place I live in now. And it's been interesting because I think there was a fear came into me, a subconscious fear came into me, having that only skylight, that being the only exit and the only place out. And if you look on it, right, it's if you want to take that further, look at the first 3 Marillion sleeves. They've all got windows on them.
Yeah. I was going to say that. I didn't want to read into too much. As it is, you were like an unmagical Harry Potter, as it was with the beginning of the story.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is that gives you an idea kind of where my
It
autobiography is
shapes who
going.
you are
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
subconsciously.
like all those things and all these things that come through with the jester and stuff like that and going out the window and
Did you get that when you were doing it though? Did you get that on a?
no, that's something you realize it just comes through. You know, as I said, I was actually started writing the first bones on an autobiography way back in 2010. It was derailed because of an explosive situation, personal situation here, right? But I mean, when I started writing it, I started to write about the big room, and then it was like when I started to think about it, and then there's a lot of things start to make sense, you know. And I think that's the kind of way, as I said, that where my autobiography goes. There's a lot of things that have happened in my life that are very relative to. They've got roots in my past, and I've identified those roots and things, you know. And that's kind of where I want to write. I mean, you know, there's writing the autobiography, which is a memoir, which is it's something it's going to become not just a kind of route through my life, you know, joined the band, left the band, did this, blah, blah, met so and so. It's not one of them. And in the same way, it's like there's a couple of, because I love movies and I always have loved movies, that, you know, I'd love to get the script right. I mean, I've done some acting, but I'm no actor. And you know, any action rules are not going to happen nowadays, not with my knees. So, you know,
Special effects, special effects.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's script writing. I mean, I've got a couple of ideas for scripts. There's been ideas for novels that have been kicking around in my head on the back of tour buses, and I am blessed with a really good memory, and I want to make sure I use that memory before, God forbid, something goes wrong with it in the next 5 years. You
Have you
know,
written long pieces like that though? Have you started to write?
I've written. I mean, you know, I mean, the sleeve notes for all the remasters are all. I mean, I think the last
Oh,
one's
right,
about
right.
10,000 words, and that to me is like going down the gym. I mean, that all is, and Fishing Friday. When I do Fishing Friday, that's just mental exercise for me
That is
because it's
amazing. That you can go on about something in a good way, not like at the crazy guy at the end of the bar going on about something. You stay on topic. You really. It's hard to say a deep dive with fish because that just feels like the world's biggest easy pun. But
yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's what it is. It's mental exercise because I mean, apart from there's nothing scripted. There's nothing written down. There are notes taken about salient points that I've got to reach,
right,
or that
right.
I want. You know, okay, what about this? I'll talk about it. But a lot of it's spurred on by, you know, I might have a spasm of imagination, you know, during one of the broadcasts, and I'll go, oh yeah, that, and I'll just launch on that, and it's good for me because it keeps my memory agile.
Hmm.
And you know, for me during lockdown, I mean, I know it helped a lot of people, just, you know, people that were on their own in solitary situations, and you know, they welcomed the Fishing Friday broadcast.
I've
And
enjoyed it myself. I've seen a bunch of them. I enjoy them. It's brain food, you
yeah,
know.
well, in the same way, for me, it gave me an opportunity for 2 hours a week to entertain, you know. And you know, when I go on a tour, you know, the first 2-3 gigs, I'm always a bit uptight and not really sure. You know, I've got a couple of chosen lines, but it's not till I get into the tour that I'm relaxed and I can take things and, you know, jump
Hmm.
off and things and you know, do jumps of the imagination. And Fishing Friday kept me sane during lockdown, just to be able to project, you know, even though it was down an iPhone screen, and it was in it, and it kept me sane as much as I think it kept a lot of other people sane
I
at
think
times.
there's two good things with it. I think it's good for the fans, or you know, because you're very connected with the fans, which is a very important thing to do. And the second thing is on you. I think there's a point between talking about nothing, which is like almost like junk food talk, like a jibber jabber, or giving like a meal when you're talking something brain food, and you can actually talk about something for 2 hours or whatever on topic where you're like you walk away thinking like that was great, and you're thinking about things as opposed to listen like somebody like as opposed to like listen like a radio show like a daily disc jockey. You're like, well, I don't know even listen to for 2 hours. Like it was just I don't listen to radio because of
Yeah,
that. But like I'll listen to you and others, you know, some other like podcast style webcast video. I hate saying podcast because it's not really a podcast. If it's on YouTube, it's like a video cast. It's like saying film
yeah,
and video. But you know what I'm saying? There's different media sources where you can get good stuff, and you were one of the sources I've been listening to during.
yeah. And I didn't want to charge for it. I mean, it was, you know, I mean, the idea came up. It was Rob Scarlin who does my website. It said, well, you should maybe do a podcast vibe thing, and I went, well, I used to do a show on Planet Rock Radio in the UK
Hmm.
and it was called. We did Official Friday, and I said, well, let's just call it Official Friday, doing a Friday. And it was originally, it was only been 1 or 2 times, and I've been doing it apart from I think I've missed about 4 weeks since April 2020. I think it
You
is.
actually helped save them too, right? The Planet Rock.
No, that was
You were
no,
part of
that
the
was a
team that
that was a.
helped it. Well, I'll
I know
say it.
that.
You were part of the group of artists that helped it. So bravo to you. You don't have to say it.
I didn't put any money in, but I put my voice behind it. I mean, it was a
Point is, you
great.
were part. I didn't say you to save the planet
Yeah.
or save the whales. I said you were part of saving a good thing. You were a team
Mm.
member. So bravo.
Yeah, I mean, like Planet Rock and a lot of these stations have taken over from the stations that really helped us way back in the early 80s. I mean, when we were out there doing tours in 82, 83, 84 and things, you were always jumping in to meet DJs in local
Hmm.
stations, Sheffield or Bristol or Cambridge, and then they just got shut down, and then the stations merged, and then there was only one show that came on, and then it was all computer led.
That was when radios. Remember, you could actually take the B side of something and flip it over and not break the band on a B side instead of a single, or a
Yeah,
DJ could get away with it back then.
yeah,
Not anymore.
but this is where this comes in now. I mean, this is
Right.
where it's evolved to. I mean, there's it's not a case of like, oh god, no, we really miss it. It just evolves, and I think this is one of the things that I'm not a complainer. I'm not sitting here going like, if only, like, it's here, deal with it, and that's the way I look at it. I'm always looking for solutions to problems. I mean, the tech I struggle. I mean, a lot of my daughter's now 30-year-old, and when your daughter, who used to rely on to guide you through shit, says, "Dad, I don't know, I don't understand it anymore," it's like you've got a problem.
Uh, that's great. Kids, that is the one thing, I don't feel like I'm old. You walk by the mirror and you see the mirror and you're like, who's that old guy? That's not me.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
it
But
was,
the thing that makes you feel older, your kids, I got a kid coming 18 now. I'm like, are you
yeah.
kidding me?
Yeah, I met up with Mid-Year at a festival in Germany about a couple of years back. Well, it was 3 years ago. There you go, another time
See?
lapse. And it was, and he said that, like, nowadays, he said, when he's at the record company or he's asking questions, he keeps on expecting to hear the word "granddad" at the end. Can you tell me where the taxi rank is? Just over there, granddad.
That's what happens, or you get the Civil War dude. Easy there, Civil
Yeah,
War
well,
dude.
I forget. I mean, it's I mean, I don't think about my age, and it's like, I mean, like, God's sake. I mean, I remember lying in my bed when I was a kid and listening to, like, the kids' radio show on what was it, the light radio or whatever it was, or the beginner radio one or whatever, Ed Stupid, playing the Beatles when I'm 64 and thinking, wow, that's something,
But
like,
it's also, you as an artist, you're a creative force. Will the music part be easy to are you kind of like easy to tuck that away now? Or
yeah, I can.
just
I mean,
writing?
I think in the first 6 months after Weltschmerz, there would be something would happen, and I'd get an idea for a lyric, and I'd turn around and see one of my wife, and I'd say, like, "Oh wow, that make a great outline," and she's looking at me with those eyes, going like, and I went, I know, and it was like, but it stopped, and now it's I look at different things. I remember when I was really young. Well, see, when I was really young, when I was about, what was that? I was still in forestry, and I was in Galashiels. My girlfriend I stayed with her in a flat in Galashiels in the Scottish borders for a while, and there was an Iranian palm reader, right? And everybody was saying how great he was, and he'd come up with some amazing stuff. And you got to meet this guy. And I met this guy, and I was a bit dubious and all the rest of it. And he said, "You're going to have 3 careers in your life," and he said, "and every one of them is going to be totally different from the one before, right? And you won't know they're happening really until they're happening." And he said, "You're in your first one now, and you're about to go into your second." And he said, they will happen, and you will basically get signs. When you're going against it, things
Mm-hmm.
will go wrong, right? And he said, if you just let it go, it'll happen. I was in forestry and I moved into music. And if somebody had told me as a forestry worker when I was 19, 20 year old that, you know, I mean, again, I was looking back at because I was reading something recently, and it was in 1980. Sorry, well, let me get this right. In 1980, I was a forestry worker, right? In 1983, I was signed to EMI, walking out in stadium stages and walking out in open airs in Germany, right? And you know, and it felt right. I didn't, you know, things happened. We got lucky.
You weren't singing though, right?
Pardon?
When you were in forestry, you had just started. You weren't really singing. You started singing around like 80, 81, right? It wasn't even like you were like a lifetime singer.
I did my first gig in 1980, which when I was 22.
So that makes it more amazing.
I wasn't like Robert Plant singing blues when I was, you know.
That's what I'm saying. It wasn't even like you were like a new phase. Like 83, you became a singer and became on stadiums. Like that's a huge growth. That's not just like a lifetime, you know, choir and singing in bands. And I mean, you went from, you know, 0 to 85, like Lamborghini speed in a music career.
I was a fan. I was a music listener. I bought Yes albums and Genesis albums and Floyd albums, and then, you know, I was, you know, I did my first gig in, I think it was March or something, April 1980, in a covers band playing in a bar in Galashiels. And then I joined Marillion in January 81, and we signed to EMI in October 82. That was drive.
Do you realize how amazing that is now? Like looking back, like do you pinch yourself going, that is a crazy, when you look at how many musicians like sing for years and they never, and you're like, I mean, it worked. It was meant to be, but you know what I'm saying? It's still amazing.
Yeah, it was, but there was a lot of luck involved in that. I mean, just finding Marillion that were in the right stage where they were at for a singer to join and pick up the reins of that band, you know. And it was drive. It was just, you know, this was what I wanted to do.
There was luck and there was talent. You mean all you guys together were the perfect storm of musicians at the perfect time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking up with Steve Rothery and stuff like that. And then finding Mark Kelly when we did, and then finding Joe Abbott when we did.
But your lyrics and the vocals with that guitar was something that was, and I'm not taking away from the other musicians by any means. You know what I'm saying? You two guys were the prog, Keith and, you know, Mick. It was something that wasn't about going on right now. It was a special force at that point.
Absolutely. You know, in the same way as when I found Mickey Simmons, you know, for the video album. It's just Collision of Stars, you know. And, you know, as I said, I mean, but it was drive. It was, you know, I had so much drive, you know, in me to make that band happen, you know. And, you know, I've been accused of being ruthless, and like, okay, I'll stand by it, you know. But it's been, you know, but certain members, you know, like, you know, being dispatched, but I knew it was for the good of the band, you know. And it was, you know, and I think that drive kept me going, and it kept me going through my solo career and stuff. And that's what I'm saying. It's like my autobiography's got a lot more to it than just, you know, being in Marillion. I mean, it's kind of how I went through. But I mean, you know, and it's interesting how things evolve and develop and you know, and reestablish themselves in some way as well. I mean, I was always a writer at school.
Right.
The one thing I was very good at was English, and I didn't like it. You know, I was just accidentally very good at English. And the one thing I loved was creative writing. If somebody said, you know, gave me a subject and goes, write me 5,000 words on a word, like, you know, a bucket or a colander or a primrose or, you know, an elephant. And I could sit and I could write an entire story about anything, right? Concoct anything. And I was really good at it. And that was when I kind of fell into being a lyricist. But that stems back to because I was an avid reader, and I used to read Edgar Rice Burroughs and you know, a lot of those kind of, you know, I mean, Tarzan was like Sven Hassel, and I mean, I used to read, I could read like crazy, you know.
Yeah.
But I was rubbish with numbers, always terrible with numbers. But that was where I was. I just love the sanctuary of words, you know.
You know? Well, it shows in the lyrics too that obviously you were an avid reader. What are you reading now? Who are your hats?
I've been reading Mark Kelly's autobiography. Work of fiction. It was it was interesting reading Mark's account. It's an interesting book, you know, and it was interesting reading it because I obviously knew what happened, right? And there was huge omissions and stuff, and there's little things that I thought he would have brought up that were really funny, but it's but I mean, as I said, I mean, it's useful having them all write the books because it helps me because I've got some research points.
Some good touchstones.
All the equipment stuff, I don't know anything about the equipment or the tech shit. I can plot a bar line out, or but it's yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's what I want to do, and if in the future, I mean, if in 2 years' time or whatever, if I want to go out, I can go out and do a spoken word tour, take a couple of musicians out, sing for half an hour if I wanted to. Just I can do what the hell I want.
Right.
And I like that kind of the freedom I've got, to some degree. I still have to, pay the heat and the electricity and the gas, which in this country is going through the roof at this point. So I might have to delay my farewell tour because of gas prices. This year, I've got the Last Straw album, which is the Live in Glasgow from 2018. That's going to be out in the next week or two, and I've got the 13 Star remix remaster that's going out in the summer sometime, together with the Blu-ray of the Vigil's End global broadcast that we did in December. And at the end of the year, I've got Vigil in the Wilderness of Mirrors that I've licensed back the rights to from Warner's, and Internal Exile, because I own the licenses for all my albums.
Which is good.
I own the copyright of all my solo material apart from Vigil, which was a huge bonus. At this point in my career, having the ability to use those and an independent framework that we have here, it really works. So Vigil and Internal will be out end of this year or beginning of next. But everything's crazy at the moment. Vinyl. I've got the 13 Star and the Feast of Consequences, which was the album previous to Weltschmerz. The vinyl of that, I've got triple vinyl box sets coming out, and they're taking 9 months to manufacture. 9 months.
What?
Because of number one, the lack of vinyl granules, and number two, all the manufacturing plants weren't able to work during the lockdowns, the staff shortages, and so every man and his dog, all these vinyl releases.
Yeah, it's like that over here too. You can't touch vinyl. You're like out a year for a new release now.
Yeah. So, but you just work around it. Like I said, it's a problem. In previous years, I might have been like, gnashing of teeth. But I just go, okay, that's the way it is. We'll find a way to work around it. Right. The things in my mind at the moment is basically the Funny Farm Kitchen Garden. And when I moved here in what was it, 1989, I bought basically a farmhouse with a bunch of outbuildings. And the outbuildings, one of them was converted into the studio where I'm now talking to you. And I used to own the house next door, and there was a residential block where the bands used to stay when they were using the Funny Farm recording studios, right? So it was a Funny Farm.
It's called the Funny Farm? I like that.
Funny Farm recording studios, right?
Nice.
And that was given by John Keeble, the Spandau Ballet drummer, who was drumming with me on the first incarnation of the solo band. He was a drummer. He says, "Man, it's like Funny Farm here, right?"
That's good.
It was, and then about a year and a half ago, I'd been posting all these gardening things up on my Facebook pages, on the fish pages, and my daughter Tara went mental. And she said, "Dad, you've got to stop putting this bloody gardening stuff up on your Facebook pages. It's a music page, not a garden page, right?" And I said, "Well, we'll have to do it some other way." She said, "Well, we need to get another page."
Yeah.
And it was like, "Okay, well, what are we going to call this?" And she said, "Well, let's call it the Funny Farm Kitchen Garden, Funny Farm Garden, Funny Farm Kitchen Garden." And I went, perfect. And this is the evolution. It started off as Funny Farm Recording Studios, and it's now become the Funny Farm Kitchen Garden. And we're trying to find a way we're looking now at basically creating a website and doing a subscription thing where people subscribe and onto the Funny Farm Kitchen Garden, and I do at least an hour of high quality footage every month. I do basically what I do in Fish and Friday, maybe twice a month, but more concentrated around gardening. And then we do Instagrams. My wife does recipes, and that way we try and monetize the Funny Farm Kitchen Garden site. And if we can get a few hundred people to come and do it, then it helps pay for the development of the garden, and it keeps us occupied. And I'm working as something different. I'm doing something else,
That's a good idea. You could there are lots of platforms now out there to do it too, whether it's a Patreon or different paid things. There's different levels of stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, it's something that we love doing, and on my account, I did say to you, like, the two big expenses we've got are football season, soccer season tickets, and the garden. And the garden, even my accountant said to me, he says, he said, like, look, there's only so much we can hide in the studio here. It's kind of hard putting sacks of fish blood and bone fertilizer down in the studio for, artist creative growth. Yeah, but yeah. So I mean, this I've got loads of things to do. I'm not worried about all that stuff. I mean, and as I said, I mean, music. I just felt that I just got to the end of it, and I've done what I really set out to do. And now there's something else, and there's something else is going to come into my life, and I'm going to go, that's where I'm going. And as I said, I'm pretty sure it's going to be, once I settle down and get into writing, it's just going to move,
Yeah.
And but
I'm looking forward to it. That'd be awesome. And honestly, you're ending the recording on a high note, because, like I said, this last album is beautiful.
Mm.
And
as I said, I mean, I've got all my solo albums all remastered now, so I've got my legacy there, and the songs will always be there, and it's they're there, and the recordings are all up there. It's kind of okay. Like I said, I didn't want to become some parody or a parody of myself. I didn't want to become remember him, like.
There's some artists that have continued on, that have done well, and some that have become parodies.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, don't get me wrong on this. I'm speaking only about myself.
No, I respect. I'm saying it's a fine line, because you're right. There are some artists that have become, it's sad, and then there's some artists that just continue to deliver. If I had to put money on, I would the quality of work I would put more money on you delivering than becoming a parody.
Yeah.
If I was a bet man.
You look at Johnny Cash. I mean, look what he was doing at the end of his career was brilliant. Some of the he reinvented
those last couple albums he did when he got with, oh my God, it was like some of his best stuff.
Yeah,
you feel his soul in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I pick and choose what's right, what I think is right for me, and what I feel is right for me. And I've never, despite what has been said about me, I've never been driven by money, and it's security, yes, but never money.
You leaving Marillion at the height is the biggest, exclamation point that you're not about money.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, that was a weird time. It was. I mean, I was. Like I said, I mean, I found my. When I was clearing out this control room, and there's loads of boxes of documents kicking around that have been like, when I moved out the old house and moved into here, they were all just stacked, and some of them were like. Restacked in corners and things, and lo and behold, like I said, I found my resignation statement. The one that I wrote on, what was it, the 9th? Was it 9th of September or something? It was, and I was and that was for 88. And it was interesting to read it because I hadn't read it for over 30 years, and it's been a strange week because I found all these old documents, and at the same time, Mark Kelly, he's still a friend of mine, right?
Right.
He sent me up his autobiography, and so I was reading that, and there was some things that really irritated me in it. But it's Mark's take. You know what I mean? He's allowed his take. As I said, it's free speech. It's but I found myself going, looking back at that period and things, and then and in fact, I was talking to Simone, my wife, just last night. I'm saying there was three big things that happened back at that period. It was leaving Marillion,
right.
There was fighting the Marillion case and fighting against the EMI, right? Well, and you could say 4, and you could say as far as building the studio, right? Building the studio at the time, I decided to do it because the EMI contract was such that I had to go in a studio. I had to get an advance of them to go in a studio. If they didn't like what I'd written or what I'd produced or whatever, then they could make me redo it again, and I had to pay for it again. And I wasn't really happy with that. And it was kind of, I didn't have any serious creative control. The bottom line was, right? And that's why I built the studio. Marillion, we used to spend fortunes on rehearsal space, on studio time, and a huge part of our debt to EMI was that. And I realized that I had to build something up here. And I realized that when I left the band that I wanted to find a place where I could rehearse, that I could write, that I could, eventually record. And I built the studio, and it cost a lot of bloody money. And it put me in a huge hole that eventually came back to rattle me at the end of 2000, right? Fighting Marillion, I didn't want the name. I didn't want paid for the brand name. I didn't want anything apart from the 15% that I felt I was due on my publishing, because songs are split 50% lyrics, 50% music. And I said, I just want my 50% for the lyrics from when I left the band. And we fought for it. It cost a lot of money, but I got the 50% lyrics, right?
Which is fair.
And yeah, and I built the studio, which was eventually took me down. I fought EMI, which basically got me out of that agreement. And although it torpedoed me for a while, I'm sitting here now owning the licenses to all my solo albums apart from Vigil, right? That upgrade to where I should have got the 50% lyric kept me alive for a lot of period in the late 90s, early to that stream, right? Having the studio, building the studio, this is now my home. It's the best place I've ever lived in. And building the studio enabled me to record all those solo albums all the way through when I was independent, and I was really on the back foot, and put it all together. In the long run, everything worked out. And it's like, back then with all those things happening, I mean, I was in a real mess. I mean, my head was in a blender going through a lot of that stuff simultaneously, but in the long run, this is where I am, and I'm really happy for it. So, leaving Marillion as well, I think if it stayed in that band, I think we would have stagnated and it would have exploded anyway.
I agree with you. I think if you're not happy, and that's, well, even if you, like, say, if you had performed now, the difference with you is you could always do quality work, but I think the point with you is stopping now is you're emotive. You're a very emotive person. Yeah. And if your heart's not into it, you could technically do it, and people that don't know you'd be like, oh, he sounds just as good. But that's not the point. It's where your heart is, and your heart has always driven your business.
Yeah.
And because if you're not creating the next best album, why do it? Because you're not driven, like I said, by money. And I think talking back how you did the break from Marillion and fighting for what you believed in ties in with people thinking like, you're saying like you're not single, you're single-mindedness. You're not at a point where you're like, dismissive of people. It could come across that way because sometimes the world is like that. You can't have everything. Somebody might want to be a football player or a soccer player in America, but you can't because you're not good at it. Sometimes you're just not good at the job needed for the rest of the team to move on. So that could seem dismissive, but the world's not going to, hug you all the time. But the fact that if you weren't single-minded, you were not going to fight for these things when they were hard. There would be no struggle, there would be no challenge. If you weren't that guy, you wouldn't be here now.
Like I said, I mean, when I was, when in 2000, when my first marriage fell apart and I lost my child for 4 years, and she eventually came back to live with me and lives in Scotland as her mother does. And, if I hadn't fought my way out of that, I would have been dead. I mean, the number of people that just said, look, just go bankrupt, just get rid of everything, Kaylee everything. I went, no.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's huge.
I could never handle listening to Kaylee on radio, knowing that it belonged to somebody else, or Lavender or Inky McCart or whatever, right? And and it was the easy way out. It was like, oh, we'll just go bankrupt and just walk away and you'll lose everything and start again. And I mean, no, this is where I live. This is my house. The studio. This is my studio. I have to have this to work. If I don't have this, I won't be able to work. And I fought for it. I've never, knowingly hurt anybody or, betrayed anybody in my career. Right. I've never, knowingly cheated anybody, and I've always been straight. And that was something I was taught by my father. And it was drilled into me by Keith Goodwin, who was our very first press officer before we signed EMI. And, he kept me on the straight and narrow. And, another guy, Andy Field, who was my production manager in Marillion, who left Marillion and stuck with me for, until he died in 1991. And it was, those people kept me on track, and they drilled into me that, be straight, be open, well, my openness comes from, I think, how I was born. And, I've always been straight with people, you know, and sometimes that upsets people. Some people get very unnerved by it, you know, but that's how I am, you know, and that's what I want to continue to be, you know.
Well, look at the world we're in. The people that are, everyone wants a golden sticker for showing up, and those ones are probably feelings hurt. Or if you're driven like you and you're going to be honest, and those are the ones that have all these big companies. You know what I mean? They say they're maniacs, but they're not. They're focused. If you don't stay through and keep honest all the way through, you're not going to achieve. You know, you're going to waffle off, and you're going to want other things. The world's not fair. No, the world's not fair. So you better put your head down, and you better keep going.
Yeah.
You know?
Like I said, I mean, you know, my wife and I mean, you know, we stay here. We've got, like I said, I've got my 89-year-old mother here. And I mean, we've hardly been out at all. I mean, we were in a hotel last December, and that was the first time we'd been in a hotel since 2019, right? And the only holiday we've had, right, since 2017 when we had our honeymoon. We've not had a holiday since 2017 when we got married. That's kind of like not true choice, but yeah, but I mean, you know, but we have, you know, we have a lifestyle. We're happy with what we do. We don't, you know, I don't relate to a lot of the stuff. I mean, there's a wee kind of metaphor story, whatever you want to call it. It was like, you know, I was looking at the music business and like with London and that kind of thing. It's like it was always you're always lectured about, you know, you have to play the big hall of the castle, right? And it's like you're nobody until you played the great hall in the castle, and like everybody's hanging about this old castle, waiting to get a gig on the main stage in the great hall, you know, and you know, and you're involved with the great hall, and you're told, well, this is where you've got to be, right? Because if you're not in the castle, you're outside, and you're in the forest, and if you're in the forest, there's monsters, right? And you can't, you know, there's monsters out there, and you won't survive, and you can't do it, right? And then it's like one day I woke up and I kind of realized that the castle I was playing, it was like Gormenghast, you know, it was all, you know, falling apart and full of wretches and vagabonds. And I took a step out of the castle, went down in the forest and found it was a really nice place. I found a wee village and they like my music. And it's like, that's where I play now, right? And yes, there are monsters, but
that is a great visual. And for those that weren't paying attention, that is the music industry right there for you folks.
Yeah, but they tell you have to be signed to a major. You have to do this. You have to have this, and you don't need it. You can live outside of the castle and be in a wee village and make just, you know, call it a cottage industry, whatever. But you can do what you want to do as an artist. You know, I mean, I am lucky. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know, I'm lucky. I've got a very loyal, devoted fan base who I do not treat with any form of disrespect whatsoever. And the one thing I've learned, you've got to deliver quality. You don't take advantage of that fan base. You know, as an independent running a mail order company, you know, you don't take the piss, right, out of your fans. You know, so you don't use them as cash cows. You know, you always kind of, and I've always done that, and I think that's why I've kept my fan base, and I'm lucky that I have got a really exceptionally loyal fan base that continue to support my work in the way that I deliver it, in the way that I do it, you know. And if it takes 5-6 years between albums, rather than being it's Christmas, we need a CD out, you know, it's like, so be it. And that's how I operated. I mean, you know, it was years between Weltschmerz and Feast, and it was 5 years between 13 Star and Feast. But you know, they're great albums. I'm proud of them. You know, great, super.
Well, and the fans that know you appreciate it because of it, and they wouldn't want you to put you out, and you are respectful, and that's why I want to talk to you, because like there's trillions of people out there that are just don't care, and it's not, you know, it's who you are.
It goes back to what I said before about you know, I didn't start singing till 1980, right?
It's so amazing every time I think of that you just went from there to there.
Yeah, but I mean, I remember round about that time standing outside a gig in Glasgow, right, waiting on Yes coming out, and standing there for about an hour in the pouring rain because I wanted to get an autograph. And the band came right out, security fought the fence, and they got in the limo and fucked off, right? And I remember that stuff, and you know, I remember that when, you know, I try to remember that when, you know, people are standing out backstage. You know, you try and do what you can. Yeah, you watch after yourself. Take care, man.
Yeah, bye.